Okay, good morning, everyone. We're in a lovely summer day that's coolish in the northern part of Israel. And we started learning just recently a book by Rabbi Ginsburgh called Living in Divine Space. Here it is. It's a beautiful book on deep explanations on Chassidus on the 6 constant commandments, or what are called the 6 duties of the heart. We'll do a little quick review just from last week to bring people into focus. And then we're going to actually be starting chapter 2. We already went through the introduction in chapter 1. So in the beginning, we learned that the mind is the interface between the soul and reality. And how we train our mind to think in terms of Torah, true thoughts, is how we're going to be able to perceive and interact with reality and create a godly space within reality, a divine space in reality, in our outer reality, and in our internal reality for ourselves. So just a little quote from chapter 1. And we're calling this, in the book, Rabbi Ginsburgh speaks about the meditation of the 6 duties of the heart as Jewish meditation, a primary Jewish meditation. We can also call it focused thought, because in order to do it, we do have to focus our thought. Another word that might be useful for people is awareness, mindfulness, to actually go about your day in a sense of mindfulness in terms of creating these connections and these 6 spatial aspects which we are encompassed. So he says, in Jewish focused thought, in Jewish meditation, we strive to understand in depth the divine truth embodied in the Torah and in the marvels of God's creation, which in and of themselves bind us to God, the Creator, in His Torah. In other words, contemplating Torah and contemplating God within creation connects us and binds us to God Himself and His Torah. And we also strive to establish points of connection between what we're learning from the depths of Torah and from our observation and connections with God, within creation, within nature, through divine providence, through Hashgacha Pratis. We want to connect those points to our actual personal lives and then be able to change and transform our reality and how we perceive reality. So in line with this, I actually want to bring up an additional teaching by Rabbi Ginsburgh, very briefly, which talks about one of the prophecies of the prophet Micha. And this is a very famous prophecy. In fact, it is written in many famous places, buildings all around the world. And in brief, what Micha said was, establish justice, or establish systems of justice, do kindness, activate your life to be full of chesed, of loving kindness, and walk humbly before God. Those 3 phases, very well known in the general world. Now, what I want to address the last one, walk humbly before God, because that, without going into the whole teaching on that aspect out of the 3 encompasses the world of thought, exactly what we're going to be talking about in terms of living in divine space. So it encompasses the world of thought, and it teaches a few things about thought to us, which is that thought, or this level of perception, the world of mind and perception, is an introverted world. It's introverted inward. Thought is inward. And Rabbi Ginsburgh explains about walk humbly with God, that this is a light that shines inward to yourself. And when we talk about walk humbly with God, one of the concepts that comes to our mind is modesty, how a person conducts themselves in terms of modesty. He gives a very beautiful definition. He says modesty, in Hebrew it's called sniut, means that others do not experience or do not have awareness of what you see or what you are experiencing. I'll just repeat that. I think it's a very helpful definition. It's broad, but it hits the essential point of what modesty and humility is. Modesty, sniut, means others do not experience or do not have awareness of what you see and what you are experiencing. And he continues and says, it's like being alone with God. And only through this being alone with God is one able to open their eyes and see the true reality. So I wanted that to be a keynote in today's learning, that really it's about being alone with Hashem, and that these meditations of the duties of the heart are to enable us to encompass that, of that very deep personal relationship with God in our lives. And therefore, then we are encompassed and enveloped by God in a surrounding way. We said last week that the mind perceives in both ways. We try to grasp and encompass a concept, and once we actually grasp it, it indeed envelops us. So the same is true of meditating upon God. The more we meditate upon God and the godless of Hashem and the personal relationship we have with Hashem in the world, the more that envelops us and enriches and shines in our lives. Okay, so now we're actually going to start with chapter 2, which begins to actually explain what are the 6 constant commandments. And I have a little screen share I'm going to put up so that you can look at a graphic picture. And there it is. So you'll see actually a cube. And I'm going to read while we have this up. You'll see a cube, and you notice that there are directions of above and below, front and in back or behind, and right and left. And that they each are one of the 6 duties of the heart. And then there's a little figure hovering in the center, which is called the Shabbos point, or the point of prayer. So let's just leave that up a little while we begin to talk about this. The 6 constant commandments are called the duties of the heart. The meditation presented here is a truly basic one in Jewish spiritual life. It embodies, meaning the 6 duties of the heart, the constant commandments. Those embody many of the fundamental teachings of Judaism, and they serve as a filter through which we may process virtually all aspects of reality. As such, it is a prime example of the purpose of Jewish meditation. So being able to attach ourselves to these 6 duties of the heart actually helps us to process all aspects of reality, because they're the core of our relationship with the truth of God in the world. So implicitly, on a spiritual plane, all of the commandments of the Torah apply to each and every Jew in times and places where they're applicable. Like when the Beit Midrash stands, there are certain mitzvot, there are certain commandments. If you're a man, there are certain commandments, or if you're a woman, there are other commandments. If you're a child, there are again other commandments. And the Baal Shem Tov taught us something very beautiful. He brought it out, that explicitly, literally on the physical plane, in all the physicality of which we relate to as 6 directions, there are only 6 of the 613 commandments that apply to all Jews at all times, in all centuries, in all places, no matter what country you live in, and no matter whether you're a man, a woman, or a child. And in as much as that, they are called the duties of the heart. So let's read them. The first one is to believe in the existence and providence of God. And you'll see in the screen share that that's attached to the above, belief in God's existence and providence. Now, the second duty of the heart is not to believe that any other gods exist, and that's below, not believing that there are other gods. To believe that God is one, and absolute, non-composite, and all-encompassing unity. And that is in front of us. And then there is to love God. That's to the right of us. There is to fear God, to be in awe of God. That's to the left of us. And the last one is to shield one's mind from negative thoughts or foreign thoughts. And that's behind us. So you can see the physical display of these 6 constant commandments, that they actually form a bubble or a cube around us, that above us is the belief in God's existence and providence. Below us is not believing that there are any other Ki'ilu gods. And in front of us is the belief in God's unity, absolute non-composite and all-encompassing unity. And to the right is the love of God, to the left is the fear of God, and behind us is shielding oneself from negative and foreign thoughts. And we'll get to the little person in the middle as we continue. So these 6 duties of the heart, these 6 constant commandments are enumerated in the introduction to Sefer HaChinuch, which refers to them allegorically. There's a parallel here. There's going to be actually many parallels as we go through the book, but the one that's important that's being mentioned now is going to be the 6 cities of refuge. So the 6 duties of the heart actually are parallel to many things, including the 6 cities of refuge, and including, which is maybe a little more familiar with us, when we stand in a sukkah during the month of Tishrei, and we take the arba minim, the 4 species, the lulav and the myrtle, the palm and the willow and the etrog, and we wave them in 6 directions. So they are also parallel to the 6 duties of the heart, the 6 constant commandments. So right now he wants to make a parallel to the cities of refuge for a reason. So the cities of refuge were designated in the Torah to serve as a refuge for somebody guilty of manslaughter, an unintentional act. So this person who had an unintentional act of killing someone else, bringing someone to death by not by intention, but happened by what's called a faulty state of consciousness. And the guilty individual was instructed to flee to one of the 6 cities of refuge. He was to remain within the city of refuge until the sin was atoned for and by the death of the high priest. Indeed, upon leaving the physical city, he never leaves the rectified state of consciousness that he acquires there. So while he's there, he's actually rectifying his consciousness. Why? Because for something like that to happen, even though it's involuntary and even though it's not something that was at all meditated, it means there was something greatly lacking in the person's consciousness that could happen. There was some very great disconnection there. And so the cities of refuge were there to rectify a person's consciousness. And that's really the point as to why the Rab brings this so early in the Sefer, is to talk about rectifying our consciousness through the duties of the heart. Every Jew is instructed to correct his or her state of consciousness by entering into the 6 constant commandments of the Torah. Literally living with them, living inside them living inside you, being alive in those 6 constant commandments is actually the way to rectify and refine and purify your state of consciousness, your divine consciousness. By abiding within that spiritual space, that spiritual cube or bubble, if you like round, you can think bubble, that's okay, or sphere, you can think sphere instead of square spaces. They create the continuously consciousness of God's presence. So that's the goal, that's the aim of the 6 duties of the heart, is that God gave them to us in order for us to continuously be vibrating in that living space that's a godly space. So we know we're in the 3 weeks, and we're supposed to be paying attention to constructing the Beit Midrash, the home, the house of God, the third Beit Midrash, the third temple that will be immediately in our days. And similarly, this is also about constructing a spiritual sanctuary where God dwells. It's more of a spiritual sanctuary for us than it is necessarily the Beit Midrash, but they are parallel. Essentially, this meditation of living in this space, of living in divine space, involves constructing a spiritual sanctuary around oneself, a cube or a sphere, defined by the 6 constant commandments as follows. I'm going to read them again because they're at times the order of the 6 constant commandments is going to change. Like in the sukkah, it's a different arrangement when we do the Arba meeting. But the 6 constant commandments have an actual order, and the order is how I read them. But let's do it again. Above you, so begin to picture yourself, whether you like a cube or you like a sphere, or you like something that is a surrounding 3-dimensional space. Above a person hovers literally the truth of the belief in the existence and providence of God. We're just naming them now. In the following chapters, he's actually going to take each one and go into them in depth on many levels. But now we're just naming them. So above us is this belief in the existence and providence of God. And below you, opposite that direction, is the negation of belief in other gods. The negation of the belief in anything that resembles a power structure, let's say in the modern world for a person, where that person would attribute power to themselves and to something other in their lives, i.e. Money is definitely a modern day idol, let's say. So we're not supposed to attribute power to any of these things. These are other gods, so to speak. So we're meant to negate them because there is only Hashem. There's only the one. Now in front of us, which is probably my favorite because it's tied in with the Shema, is the belief that God is one. And we will get to the more expansive definition of that. To the right of us, it makes sense, the right is loving kindness, is the love of God, the whole love relationship we have with God. And to the left is the balance of that, which is the fear, yira, the awe of God, standing in awe of God, having a proper perspective of God in our lives. And in back of us, think of a Malek attacking us in back as we try to leave and travel out of Mitzrayim, is shielding the mind from negative thoughts. So there are 2 that are here, which is below and back, where it appears to be we have to sort of protect ourselves and be very clear. Below us is, there's nothing, there's only God. There's no other gods. There's nothing else that has power in all of creation for all time ever. But in the back, it's more sneaky. It's in back of you. You have to really actually be aware of what's in back of you. It's the side of yourself that you don't see that often unless you turn around and face it, right? It's in back of you. And in back of you is all of those kinds of thoughts that come to bring doubt to a person's mind, to bring negativity, to lower your connection with Hashem, to interfere, to distract you, to tempt you. These are all the things that we have to shield our mind from that are called negative thoughts. Okay, now he's going to go into the one in front of us, a little bit, the Shema. In the quintessential statement of Judaism, the Shema, hear, O Israel, God is our God, God is one. The sages perceived the Hebrew word for one, echad, as alluding to the 6 dimensions of space. Echad, the Hebrew word for one, is spelled with an aleph, a chet, and a daled. So you have in the Aleph, Chet, and Daled, you have 3 letters, Aleph, Chet, Daled of Echad, the end of the Shema. You have an allusion to the 6 directions of space that are the 6 duties of the heart. The Aleph is 1. The Aleph represents God, the one. The one where? In all the 7 heavens and the earth. Because we have Aleph is 1, and Chet of Echad is 8, and Daled of Echad is 4. So you have the one God who is the one being that is in all the 7 heavens and the earth. So that's the 8. All the 7 heavens and the 1 earth equals 8. That's the Chet. And in all the 4 lateral directions, not above and below, but front, back, right, left. Those are the lateral directions. Otherwise, you have vertical directions above and below. So actually, the Echad in the Shema, at the end of the Shema, actually alludes to this divine space of the 6 duties of the heart, the constant commandments. In our spiritual sanctuary, above corresponds to the 7 heavens, and below to the earth. So remember, above was the belief in the existence and providence of God, but the above also actually has to do with this concept of the 7 heavens, which we'll need to understand in the continuation. And below is to our worldly plane, earth, the earth. And the 4 lateral directions of east, west, south, and north, to the front, the back, the right, and the left, respectively, have to do with the directions in which Torah emanates in the world. Torah's directional orientation actually faces east, sunrise. And in that sense, since we faced east, sunrise, and also facing east is towards Yerushalayim, the holy city of Yerushalayim in Eretz Israel. So when a Jew prays, they're meant to face that direction, to face towards Yerushalayim, where the Beit Midrash will be and stood before and is actually spiritually even now. And therefore, when you face east, so to the right ends up being to the, it's in other words, there's directions here. There's specific directions being given to us, have a lot to do with the Beit Midrash, how the Beit Midrash is built. But he's just stating them now. Since Torah's orientation faces east, the sunrise, so south is to the right, north is to the left, and the west sunset is behind us. In Chassidus, we're taught that human consciousness develops from first recognizing the vertical space coordinate of above and below. And that's true also of a child learning. The first thing they're going to begin to recognize spatially is above and below. That's what human consciousness grasps first. So we have above us is the belief in the providence of God, and below negation of other powers that don't exist, that one might mistakenly think do exist. That's the vertical space. But only after human consciousness develops the vertical space do we then start to recognize and incorporate into our spatial consciousness the horizontal and lateral coordinates of what's called front and back, and right and left. And this is actually the order of the letters of Echad in the end of the Shema. First, we're recognizing the one God in the Aleph of Echad. Hashem Echad, Hashem is one, God is one. Right? So first we're recognizing the Aleph, that was the first letter, the oneness of God. That's the vertical space. And only then do we begin to recognize the Chet, the 8 heavens and earth combined, and the Daled, the 4 directions. And he says, and this is as well the meditation of the 6 constant commandments of the Torah. Now it's beginning to give us a understanding in a spatial time orientation level, that the way that the 6 constant commandments are naturally oriented according to the beliefs that we're supposed to build and how we're meant to build them is specifically also spatially oriented. At first, it's above and below. Above, let's put that little, so you can see it. We'll put that little screen share up one more time. You could actually see it visually. That the first thing a person is going to attach to is above, the belief in God's existence and providence, and then to work out not believing in any other gods, any other powers. And then in front of you, that's the next very one that comes. In front of you, the belief that God is one, which is really Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. That is the belief in God's unity. Then to the right is the love of God. To the left is the fear of God. And only after all of that do we come to the part where Amalek might enter, the negation, the shielding the mind from any negativity or thoughts. Whoops, I did that without showing it. Now we show it. Sometimes you have to be careful with these things when they come up. There it is. Above, below, right. Sorry, above, below, front, right, left, behind. Okay. So that is how the 6 constant commandments begin. Now, he's going to begin to talk about them. We're still in chapter 20. We're still in chapter 2. If you have the book, we're actually on page 22, Living in Divine Space. So he starts by beginning to examine the emotions of the heart. In Kabbalah, the 6 sides of the cube correspond to the 6 emotions of the heart that originate in the supernal sphirot. So now there's a tie-in that we're going to have to the 6 constant commandments, the duties of the heart. That's why they're called the duties of the heart, and the midos of our heart that we are used to working with during Sfira Sa'omer, during the time between Pesach and Shavuos. So these 6 sides, the 6 duties of the heart, have a correspondence to the 6 emotions of the heart that originate in the supernal sphere, the channels of divine light and energy with which God creates the world. In particular, the 6 sphirot that correspond to the 6 emotions of the heart correspond as well to the 6 days of creation. We're going to go through them slowly. Just this correspondence. The correspondence being the duties of the heart, the emotions of the heart, the 6 constant commandments, maybe we'll call them that, and then the aspects of the heart, and then the actual days of creation. So each of these channels or emotions of the heart also possesses an inner light or soul experience. So we have first that to the right of us, which is the south, is going to be chesed, love and kindness. In the duties of the heart, it's going to be love of God, to the right of us. So that's going to come up to be day 1, the very first day of creation. God created light with love. That's the first day of creation. So in the first day of creation, the sphera is the sphere of chesed, of loving kindness, and it possesses the inner light of love. That's the inner light. It's shining on the first day of creation. Of the 6 duties of the heart, this is a very obvious one. This is the direction of in front of us is the love of God. Then we have the second day of creation. So on the second day of creation, God separated the higher waters from the lower waters by creating a firmament. And the firmament was created through Gevura or Yira, which is called fear. So now we have to the left of us in that spatial orientation of living in divine space. The second day is to the left of us. And that inner light is actually Yira, fear. So we have the right and we have the left on the first 2 days of creation. Now we have the sphere of Tiferet, of what's called beauty, harmony, and this possesses the inner light of Rachamim, of mercy, the 3rd day. So we did Sunday, Monday, now we're on Tuesday. The 3rd day, of which Hashem said everything was good. right, is Tiferet, beauty, harmony, the inner light of mercy, Rachamim. On the third day, God created life on earth, including the vegetation, beautiful fruit-bearing trees, all with Rachamim, with mercy. And which is this going to be? If we're on the third day, it's going to be the east. It's going to actually be to the front of us. What we said is the Shema. So we had to the right of us, the left of us, and now the third day, which is this Rachamim of all of the beautiful aspects, living aspects of creation, is going to be to the front of us. So it's nice to have this orientation, because when we're thinking about it, it enriches us to have a sense of that what came before us, after we establish the boundaries of the love of God and our loving, kind relationship that God has to us, and the awe of God, the proper perspective of God in our lives. Then we have what comes in front of us. The very first thing that comes in front of us is the creation of life, of the parts of the aspects of creation that actually sustain mankind. All the fruit-bearing trees and the vegetation are the primary sustainers of all of creation for people, for mankind. That's what comes in front of us. And that comes from this level of harmony, but really the interface of which is Rachamim, of God's mercy, to provide in front of us, in the very front of us, what we need. And therefore it follows that in front of us is this declaration of faith, this declaration of the primary emotion and devotion we have for Hashem, which is encapsulated in the Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. That's what it is in front of us. Then we have the Sfirot, this is on the fourth day, of Netzach, which is called the Sfirot of victory and eternity. And it possesses the inner light of bitachon, of trust, a very important aspect in our world these days. So what is the fourth day, Netzach, victory? The fourth day of having trust is what is above us. And what is above us is the belief in the existence and providence of God. It's literally trusting God. How do we trust God? We trust God because we absolutely believe in the existence and the providence of God every single rega moment, every single mamish rega moment, or whatever aspect of quantum time could be smaller than a rega moment, that every single participle of a second that we are believing in the providence of God in our lives, and we are attaching ourselves to it. We believe there's only God, ein od milvado, there's nothing but God. God is above us. God is also inside us, as we'll come to understand through this meditation. But this spatial orientation of being victorious, of attaching to Netzach, which is also eternity, and basically of trust, is to trust that God is just the existence and providence of God. That's what God is. So what happened on the fourth day of creation? On the fourth day of creation, God created the sun and the moon, the great luminaries, and also all the stars that anoint them, which symbolize transcendent light. And the immanent light of God, which we cannot directly see, but the presence of which we sense and become inspired by when we trust in God. So the creation of the sun and the moon and the heavenly bodies has to do with the light of God, transcendent light and the immanent light. The transcendent light is the name of God associated with the name of God that is transcendent, which is Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey, right? And it has to do with trust. It has to do with trust. And it's interesting that when we look up at the sky and we see the sun during the day, or even if we see the clouds, we know the sun is somewhere there behind us, even if it's a really cloudy, rainy day. Somewhere in back of those clouds and rain is the sun shining during the day on planet Earth. And at night, when the sun rotates to a different position on planet Earth, earth from where we are living. Then the moon and the stars come up. And we're looking up. The orientation is above. And it's meant to remind us of God's providence and our trust in God. Just as each day evolves and revolves and comes about again and again on planet Earth with newness, with new possibilities. And we shouldn't take for granted that every day we wake up and a new day is coming and there are new possibilities for us to engage with God in the world. That's all in the physical plane of the plan of creation. It's all above us. It's very interesting that that's, the orientation, just like the providence and the existence of God is above us. So that's Netzach, the trust of God on the fourth day. The fifth day is called the Sphera of Hod. Hod is having an attitude of gratitude, being grateful to Hashem. And it's also an aspect of splendor. Hod is considered splendor, like it's one of the 8 faces of beauty, splendor. And it also has to do with acknowledgement. Now, the inner light of Hod is Timimut, which is translated in English to be sincerity or simplicity. From that level of sincerity and simplicity, of being a person being Timimut, they are able to put themselves aside out of the center of the picture. And what comes out of that is that God becomes the center of the picture, the true focal point, which is the truth all the time, and to acknowledge God. That's the other definition of Hod, is to acknowledge God. And so on the fifth day, this inner light of sincerity, of Timimut, brings us not only into a humble, receptive position of giving thanks to God for all of the blessings that we have of being enlivened and being alive on this day, and all the potential and all the possibility, putting everything else aside and really focusing on that, because that is the truth of the day, and everything and anything can happen on this day, including the Geula Shlema. How's that for a good thought, right? We would like to have that happen, B'ezrat Hashem. So we're putting that in our, in a sense, this level of Hod, of really sincerity, Timimut. Now, the direction in the living in divine space, sphere or cube, is a very interesting one. Hod is below. And below is where we're supposed to negate any other false powers, false ki'ilu, idols, right? So that really has to do with trusting in God, that we're trusting in God all of the time, and we're directing ourselves to the truth of what actually is the constant commandment, the duties of the heart, to negate any other belief in anything else, that anything else has power in our lives, no matter how it appears, whether it be governments or militaries or modern technology or money or a position I have as a job in a firm and who I am or who I'm over or who I'm under. None of that matters. It's not the real reality. The real reality is just trusting God. And so that trust of God is paired with, because Netzach and Hod are the right leg and the left leg, and the legs walk together. So the trust in God, which is Netzach, is paired with acknowledging God, the left leg, to give thanks to have a proper perspective of gratitude, and to acknowledge God at all times. And that's this level of simplicity, of sincerity, Timimut, that we give thanksgiving to. And he says a little bit more about it. He says, on the fifth day, God created the fish and the birds, the splendor of the skies and the splendor of the seas. The fish and the birds are similar. It's actually sort of like the birds swimming in the ocean and the fish that fly in the heavens, in the sky, right? They are actually parallel to each other as created creatures, the fish in the waters and the birds in the sky. So they are called the splendors of the seas and the sky. And God blessed them to be fruitful and multiply, an act performed in the animal kingdom instinctively, which epitomizes the attribute of simplicity, that nature engages in being fruitful and multiplying on a very instinctive level that's just from Hashem, that's where they're acting from. And so that's the attribute of tamimus, pure simplicity. And that was what happened on the fifth day, the creation of the fish and the birds. And that is, as we said, the level of living in divine space that's below us, which is the opposite of trust in God. It would be forgetting God and believing that something else has power in our lives. And now we come to the sixth day. So the sixth day is Yesod, foundation. And it possesses the inner light of truth, emet, the truth. Yesod is on the inner experience level, the truth. In it being the truth, Yesod validates all of the previous emotions by bringing them to consummation or fulfillment in reality. How does truth get displayed? It's like the seal of truth in reality. It says that God's seal of truth is inside all of reality. We only need look for it. A primary example of that in Jewish life, for Am Yisrael, for the Jewish people, is a baby boy having a bris. And this occurs in the level of Yesod and is called the act of the seal of truth of God. The actual bris, the covenant of the bris, is called the seal of truth of God in the world. So on the sixth day, God created mankind, the human being. And it's the human being that symbolizes and has the greatest potential for reflecting the truth of God into reality. And what is this level? So this level is the most challenging level of our living in divine space cube. It's the back. It's the place where doubt can come in, and it's exactly the place where we have to put up the greatest effort to maintain our connection to godliness, because the foundation is the truth of God in the world. And anything that comes to challenge the truth of God, anything or any people, any philosophy, any government, anything in the world that challenges the truth of God is considered Amalekite. And it's exactly what we're meant to guard ourselves from, foreign thoughts. And it has to do with the creation of the human being, who is meant to embody and rise up to reflecting to the world, and especially the nations of the world and all of creation, the truth of God. Ein od milvado. There is only God. There's only godliness in the world. And that's something that Am Yisrael is charged with as a everlasting mission. That our mission is to be able to reflect the truth of God in the world. And that is this level of our living in divine space that is to the back of us. It makes sense that it would be the truth, because anything that's coming from the back is there to trick us into thinking that something else could be true. How do you know that's true? Really? Do you have any proof of it? This is like how the doubts come in, and all of the things that have to do with our modern day society, including social media, which certainly can often lack completely any truth to it at all, even relative truth, let alone emet v'amiti, actual godly truth. And so it's that place where we have to shield ourselves, and that is the strength of Yesod, of the foundation. The strength of what we stand upon in the world is the truth of God in the world, and how we display that to the world. And that even though the opposition could come from the back, which is sort of like a sneak attack, like Amalek, so we have to be aware. We have to be aware that it's just Amalek, and Amalek's time is up. It's up this year. It has relatively almost, the time is ticking away. It's going to be finished soon, any moment, even today. And we won't have to worry about it. The back will just become the truth of Ein Od Milvado. There is only God in this world. Okay, that's a lot of information. I'm going to put my bookmark on that we stopped at the days of creation and corresponding them to the directions of living in divine space. And we'll continue next week, B'ezrat Hashem.